The salt spray kissed my face, a cold, damp caress that did little to wake the dead parts of me. Here I was, Cole, standing on the precipice of the container terminal, fog rolling in like a shroud. It was a place I knew, a labyrinth of steel giants that whispered secrets in the wind. Now it felt like a tomb. The air tasted of brine and something else, something metallic and sharp like fear. My old life, the one with the badge and the purpose, felt a universe away. Well, after him, the ghost of that case clung to me like the persistent dampness that seeped into my bones. He was the one who'd shattered my world, the phantom who danced through the city's underbelly, leaving a trail of meticulously executed crimes. And I, Cole, had failed to catch him. The shame was a bitter pill I swallowed daily. A gruff voice crackled through the static of my burner phone. "Cole, you there?" I grunted, my gaze sweeping the skeletal cranes silhouetted against the bruised twilight sky. "I'm here. What is it? Got something that might perk your ears up." The voice belonged to a former colleague, a man who still navigated the murky waters of law enforcement unlike me, another stolen cat from a pampered socialite. My sarcasm was a shield, worn thin but still serviceable, a pause heavy with unspoken weight. "This is different, big score, jeweled depository, downtown, clean, too clean, some might say." I felt a tremor, a faint ripple in the stagnant pool of my apathy. Too clean how? No witnesses, no forced entry, security systems bypassed like they were child's play, and the precision, the way they moved, like they'd cased the joint for months, then executed a flawless ballet of theft. My breath hitched. Ballet, that was the word. It was his signature, the very thing that had taunted me for years. "Anything else?" I asked, my voice betraying a tension I hadn't felt in a long time. "Just one thing, a small detail, probably nothing, but the responding officers found this near the ventilation shaft on the roof. They said it was odd. A faint, almost imperceptible click echoed in my mind. Odd, made of what looks like old paper, like parchment. The world tilted. The fog seemed to thicken, pressing in, muffling the distant clang of metal. Origami. He'd left them before. Small, delicate paper birds folded with impossible precision, a silent, mocking testament to his intelligence. But I can get eyes on it, if Ira interested. Interested? The word felt inadequate, a pale imitation of the storm brewing inside me. This wasn't just a heist. This was a ghost returning, a cruel echo of my greatest failure. It all screamed his name. "I'm interested," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Tell me everything." As I listened, piecing together the fragments of information, a grim certainty settled over me. This wasn't a copycat. This was him. And I, Cole, was being pulled back into the inferno I thought I'd escaped. The container terminal, fog rolling in, felt less like an escape and more like a prelude to a reckoning. The ghost was back, and this time I wouldn't let him dance alone. The salt-laced air, thick with the metallic tang of rust and diesel, clung to me like a second skin. Fog, a pearly shroud, muted the harsh industrial lights of the container terminal, blurring the towering stacks of steel boxes into indistinct giants. Each gust of wind carried the low groan of metal on metal, a mournful soundtrack to my unease. This place, the container terminal, fog rolling in, felt like a forgotten corner of the world. A perfect stage for the specter I was beginning to fear had returned. My worn leather jacket did little to ward off the chill that wasn't entirely from the damp air. It was the kind of cold that seeped into the bone, a phantom echo of past failures. Enough to snag my attention, enough to pry open the rusted lock on the door of my self-imposed exile. I walked, my footsteps muffled by the damp asphalt between the behemoths of cargo. Each container was a sealed mystery, a potential hiding place, a silent witness. My eyes scanned the ground, searching for anything out of the ordinary. A scuff mark too fresh, a discarded tool that didn't belong, a faint scent that might betray a presence. The informant had been vague, terrified. He'd mentioned the stolen goods specific, high-value electronics, untraceable, not the usual smash and grab. This was calculated, precise. A flicker of movement caught my peripheral vision. I froze, my senses on high alert. A lone figure, silhouetted against the dim glow of a distant lamp, was hunched over something near the base of a stack. Not a dock worker, not with that furtive posture. My gut tightened. Was this the ghost I was chasing, or just another lost soul in this labyrinth of commerce? The fog swirled around me, playing tricks with my vision, distorting shapes. As I got closer, the figure straightened. He was holding a small, metallic object, turning it over in his hands. "Lost something?" My voice, rough from disuse, cut through the low hum of the terminal. He jumped, a sharp, startled movement, and fumbled the object. It clattered onto the asphalt. He whirled around, his eyes wide, darting from me to the object on the ground. He looked like a cornered animal. "Just looking," he stammered, his voice thin. I didn't move. My gaze flickered to the object he dropped. It was a small, intricate piece of circuitry, unlike anything I'd seen on standard shipping equipment. Looked almost custom-made. Looking for what exactly? I took another step closer, the man visibly tensed. Nothing, just a mistake. He made a move to scoop up the component, but I was faster. My boot nudged it further away. "This is a restricted area," I stated, my voice low, devoid of warmth. "And I don't look like I belong here." He finally met my eyes. There was a flicker of recognition, quickly masked by fear. I don't know what I read talking about. The electronics, the precision, the timing. I listed them, watching his reaction. His jaw tightened. He knew. "I am mistaken," he said, but the conviction was gone. He was trying to bluff and failing. "Am I?" I knelt, my movements fluid, practiced. I picked up the circuit board. It felt cool and smooth in my gloved hand. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the solder points impossibly neat. This wasn't the work of some low-level thief. This was sophisticated. "Where did I get this?" I asked, my voice a low growl. He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the component. Then he bolted. He didn't run towards an exit, but deeper into the maze of containers. I was on my feet in an instant, the circuit board secured in my jacket pocket. The chase was on. He was faster than I expected, weaving through the narrow aisles with desperate agility. The fog, a fickle accomplice, obscured my view, making it a disorienting game of cat and mouse. I heard his footsteps fading, then a clang as he likely scaled something. I cursed under my breath. This was why I'd stepped away. The physical exertion, the constant threat, the gnawing uncertainty. But the circuit board in my pocket was a tangible link. A piece of the puzzle. I had to know if he was truly back. I had to stop him before this escalated, before the symphony of chaos became a full-blown crescendo. Against my better judgment, against every instinct screaming at me to walk away, I plunged deeper into the fog, following the faint trail of a ghost. The container terminal, fog rolling in, was no longer just a backdrop. It was the beginning of my undoing, or perhaps my redemption. The air tasted of salt and diesel, a familiar acrid perfume that clung to my clothes like a second skin. The container terminal, fog rolling in, was a labyrinth of steel giants, their skeletal frames disappearing into the milky shroud. Each hulking rectangle was a potential hiding place, a silent witness to whatever secrets this damp, gray world held. The rhythmic groan of distant cranes, like weary giants stretching their limbs, was the only soundtrack to my unease. The detective's words echoed in my mind, a discordant chime against the mournful foghorns. "Mistaken, Cole. You're always mistaken." But the tremor in his voice, a flicker of something akin to fear in his eyes, told a different story. He knew. He knew I saw it, the signature, the same chilling precision that had once defined a phantom. My fingers traced the intricate circuitry on the board I'd salvaged, not just any electronics. These were the nervous system of a grander plan, a symphony of stolen parts orchestrated with a virtuosity that made my gut twist. The previous jobs, the armored car, the data center, they were mere overtures. This felt like the crescendo. I'd been watching the docks for days, a ghost among the legitimate shadows of stevedores and security guards. Components that, when assembled, could do far more than just bypass a security system. The fog pressed in, muffling the world, sharpening my senses. I could almost hear the hum of latent power, the silent anticipation of destruction. Then a flicker of movement, too quick for a casual observer, too deliberate for a stray animal cloaked in the gray gloom, detached itself from the shadow of a stacked container. It moved with a predatory grace, its silhouette sharp against the diffused light. My hand instinctively went to the worn leather of my jacket, feeling the reassuring weight of the piece I carried. Not for show. Not anymore. The figure paused, scanning the expanse, then melted back into the labyrinth. A scout, perhaps, or the architect himself. The news filtered through the usual channels, a distorted echo of chaos. This was an extraction. A high-security vault buried deep within the city's financial district, breached with impossible finesse. No alarms tripped, no witnesses disturbed, just empty, and the specific, almost artistic, removal of a single, unmarked briefcase. The detective found me at my usual haunt, a grimy bar where the stale beer was a constant. He didn't bother with pleasantries. His face was etched with a weariness that mirrored my own. "It's happening again, Cole," he stated, his voice rough. "The same M.O., clean, silent, and the target. It's like nothing before." I swirled the amber liquid in my glass, the ice clinking a lonely rhythm. "What was in the briefcase?" He hesitated, his gaze flicking to the street outside. "That's the thing no one knows. It wasn't listed in any inventory. It was off the books." Off the books, that was the Phantom's specialty, tapping into the hidden currents, the transactions that existed outside the light. This wasn't about money, not entirely. This was about leverage, control. "They're not just stealing things, detective," I said, the words tasting like ash. "They're collecting them for a purpose." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "And you know that purpose?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture I desperately tried to forget. The same pattern, and the same profound disregard for the lives that stood in the way. "This is bigger than the last time, Cole," the detective pressed. "The collateral damage. It's a risk, and the brass are breathing down my neck. They want answers. The Phantom's return wasn't just a threat to the city, it was a direct challenge to my own failed redemption. The weight of my past, the ghost of the one I couldn't save, pressed down, a tangible force. "They'll get their answers," I said, my voice low, a promise and a threat. "But they'll get them from me, and they won't like what they hear." The fog outside had thickened, a suffocating blanket. The city held its breath, waiting for the next move. The stakes had risen, and this time there would be no room for error, not for him, and certainly not for me. The salt-laced air bit at my lungs, a familiar sting that always accompanied the encroaching night at the container terminal, fog rolling in. The sky had bled from bruised purple to an inky black, and the vast expanse of stacked metal boxes, usually a jagged silhouette against the twilight, now dissolved into indistinct hulks. Each low hum of a distant crane and the mournful groan of unseen ships felt like a whisper of the Phantom's presence. I'd been here for hours, a shadow amongst shadows, sifting through the debris of the last heist. The official report was a tidy thing, all about missing electronics, a clean entry, a ghost's exit. But the details, the ones the suits in their sterile offices glossed over, they snagged at me. The precise angle of the cut in the reinforced steel door, the way the security cameras had been bypassed, not disabled, but redirected, showing an empty corridor for precisely 3 minutes. It was too elegant, too deliberate. It reeked of the same meticulous madness that had stalked this city years ago. My fingers traced the faint, almost invisible scratch marks on the concrete floor near where the primary vault had stood. Not from a crowbar, not from brute force. These were delicate, precise, like a surgeon's scalpel, not a thief's crowbar. I'd seen them before, or something like them. A hulking silhouette detached itself from the gloom. The dock supervisor, his face a roadmap of exhaustion and suspicion. He'd been reluctant to let me poke around, but a few strategically placed words, a hint of my old badge, and a shared distaste for the current incompetence had opened the way. "Anything, Cole?" His voice was rough, like gravel grinding. I shook my head, not looking up. "Just ghosts and bad decisions." He grunted, a sound that conveyed 1,000 unsaid complaints about the city's decaying infrastructure and the incompetent police force. "They took the whole damn shipment, high-end processors, worth a fortune." "And nothing else?" I asked, my gaze sweeping the cavernous space. The air still held the faint, metallic tang of ozone, a lingering ghost of the high-powered equipment used. "Just that, clean as a whistle, except—" He hesitated, kicking at a loose piece of debris. "There was a strange smell, like burnt sugar, almost faint. My guys noticed it." Burnt sugar, my gut tightened. I remembered that scent, a faint, cloying sweetness that clung to the air after the Phantom's work. The authorities had dismissed it as industrial residue, a common byproduct of the labyrinthine processes that churned within the city's forgotten corners. But I'd known better. It was a signature. "This isn't just about the processors, is it?" The supervisor shrugged, his shoulders slumping. "Who knows, money talks, maybe they're building something." Building something, the phrase echoed in my mind. The Phantom hadn't just killed, he'd orchestrated. Each victim, each crime scene, had been a carefully placed piece in a larger, terrifying mosaic. And these heists, they felt like the same macabre artistry. A faint smudge of what looked like dried grease caught my eye. I scraped a tiny sample into a sterile bag from my pocket. It was a long shot, but the Phantom had always been about precision, about leaving just enough of himself behind for me to find. "The last target," I said, my voice low, almost to myself. "The tech firm. What did they specialize in?" The supervisor frowned, his brow furrowed in thought. "Cutting-edge stuff, advanced circuitry. They were working on some kind of data encryption, I think, top-secret government contracts." Data encryption, my breath hitched. The Phantom's victims had always been connected, not by circumstance, but by a hidden thread, a shared vulnerability. And the methods, the precision, the almost artistic execution. It was all coming back. The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a picture far more sinister than mere larceny. I pulled out my phone, its screen a pale beacon in the gloom. I scrolled through old case files, images of crime scenes I'd tried to forget, the faces of the dead etched into my memory. Then I found it. A grainy photograph taken from an evidence locker of a small, tarnished silver locket. It had been found clutched in the hand of the Phantom's final victim, a detail that had baffled the investigating team. The locket was empty, its interior worn smooth by time. But on the inside lid, barely discernible, were two tiny, almost invisible etchings, a stylized and a reversed Z. I zoomed in, my pulse quickening. The faint scratch marks on the floor, the meticulous planning, the burnt sugar scent, the focus on advanced technology. And now this locket. It was a pattern. A terrifying, undeniable pattern that screamed of the past, of the killer I'd hunted and failed to catch. The data encryption, the processors, they weren't just valuable commodities, they were tools. And the Phantom, or someone wearing his mask, was building something far more dangerous than I had imagined. The fog outside seemed to press in, a tangible weight, and I knew this game had just entered its deadliest phase. The tang of salt and diesel choked the air, a familiar perfume of decay and industry. I stood at the edge of the container terminal, fog rolling in like a shroud, muffling the distant groan of ships and the clatter of unseen machinery. Each hulking metal box, stacked like forgotten gods, held its own secrets, its own potential for darkness. And tonight I was hunting for one in particular. The whispers had led me here, to this desolate stretch of waterfront where shadows stretched and distorted. A name, a location, a time fragments passed hand to hand in the grimy underbelly of the city. It felt like a trap, a lure, but the Phantom's signature was too clear, too insistent to ignore. This wasn't just a copycat, it was him, or someone who knew him intimately. A hulking silhouette detached itself from the gloom near a cluster of stacked containers. Not a dockworker, not with that stillness, that predatory grace. He moved with a deliberate slowness, each step measured, each shift of weight a calculated threat. "You're late," the voice rumbled, a gravelly rasp that seemed to scrape against the damp air. It was him, or at least someone who knew the Phantom's game. He'd been a facilitator, they called it, a man who made things disappear or appear for the right price. His name, if he'd ever truly used one, was lost to the ether. "I don't like being kept waiting," I replied, my voice deliberately flat, betraying none of the frantic pulse hammering against my sternum. The fog swirled around us, a curtain of white separating us from the world, from any witnesses, from any hope of immediate aid. He chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "Patience, detective. You're looking for the wrong thing, or rather you're looking in the wrong place for the right thing." My brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? The data, the methods?" "It's all him." "Him, yes," the stranger conceded, his eyes, two glints of obsidian in the dim light, fixed on mine. "But not how you think. He's not just a phantom, he's a collector, and his collection is growing." A collector, the word settled in my mind like a stone. What if the victims themselves were the prize? What does he collect? I pressed, stepping closer, the fog pressing in on us, thick and suffocating. The stranger took a step back, a subtle shift that spoke volumes. Information, secrets, things people would kill to keep hidden. And tonight he's making a delivery or a retrieval, depends on your perspective. My mind raced. The encrypted data. It wasn't just a boast, a signature. It was a ledger, a manifest. And the heists, the meticulously planned robberies, weren't about the money. They were about what the victims possessed. "Where?" I demanded, my voice a low growl. "That's the beauty of it, detective. You're already here." He flicked his gaze towards the container he'd indicated earlier. "Inside that box, you'll find what you're looking for, or rather, what he was looking for." My hand tightened on my weapon. This was it. The confrontation, the heart of the matter. I moved towards the container, the metal groaning as I nudged the latch. The fog seemed to thicken, pressing closer, as if the very air held its breath. As the heavy door creaked open, a blast of frigid air hit me, carrying a faint, metallic scent. Inside, bathed in the weak beam of my flashlight, was not what I expected. No bodies, no trophies. Instead, rows upon rows of hard drives, stacked neatly, each one labeled with a cryptic alphanumeric code. And in the center, on a small, foldable table, sat a single, unlocked laptop. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was the Phantom's hoard. The secrets he'd stolen, the lives he'd dismantled. But as I reached for the laptop, a sudden movement caught my eye. A flicker of motion at the edge of my vision. Before I could react, a sharp, blinding light seared my eyes, followed by a dull thud against the back of my head. The world tilted, the fog swirling into a dizzying vortex. I felt myself falling, the cold metal floor rushing up to meet me. I had found the Phantom's trove, only to become a part of his collection. The blast of frigid air was a slap to my face, carrying with it the sharp tang of salt and something else, something metallic and acrid. My breath plumed white in the sudden chill. The beam of my flashlight cut through the gloom, dancing over stacks of crates, their surfaces slick with condensation. This was the heart of the container terminal, fog rolling in, a labyrinth of steel and shadows. It wasn't filled with the usual cargo, no bolts of cloth, no stacks of electronics. Instead, it was a sterile, almost surgical space, lined with smooth, gray material. In the center sat a single, large piece of equipment, humming with a low, resonant thrum. It was a complex network of tubes and wires, a pulsating heart of polished metal and glass. Beside it, a series of monitors displayed intricate, looping patterns like digital tapestries woven from light. This was too precise, too clean. The killer I'd hunted, the one who'd vanished like smoke, had a penchant for leaving behind cryptic clues, not just bodies. They called him the architect, for the way their victims were arranged, posed, almost built into their final resting places. I stepped further inside, my boots making soft thuds on the metallic floor. A workbench was neatly arranged, tools laid out with an almost reverent order. Scalpels, fine-tipped pliers, spools of specialized wire all gleaming under the harsh interior light. And then I saw it. Tucked beneath a coil of copper wire, a small, leather-bound journal. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. The leather was worn smooth, the pages brittle with age. Opening it felt like prying open a tomb. The handwriting was elegant, almost calligraphic, but the words were a descent into madness. It wasn't a confession, not in the traditional sense. The entries detailed experiments, observations, and a growing fascination with control. Not just physical control, but the manipulation of perception, of memory. I skimmed through pages filled with diagrams that vaguely resembled the patterns on the monitors, with notations about neural pathways and synaptic responses. My gaze snagged on a passage that made my blood feel sluggish in my veins. "The city is a canvas," it read, "and its inhabitants the paint. My art is not in destruction, but in transformation, to sculpt the raw material of consciousness, to refine it, to make it perfect." Perfect. The word echoed in the cavernous space. They were about acquisition. Acquiring the components, the resources, the subjects needed for whatever grand, horrifying experiment was unfolding here, and the connection to the architect, it was undeniable. My eyes scanned the journal again, searching for a name, a face, anything to anchor this phantom to reality. Then a name jumped out, underlined twice, followed by a date. Dr. Elias Thorne, the breakthrough. Thorne. He'd been so helpful, so involved. Too involved, perhaps. Thorne. He had access to the police files, to my own frantic notes. He'd been the one who'd theorized about the killer's advanced understanding of human behavior, about their ability to anticipate every move. He'd fed me information, guided my investigation, all while being the very thing I was hunting. I flipped further, my heart racing, a frantic drumbeat against the low hum of the machinery. The journal detailed the creation of this device. It was designed, the writer explained, to access and rewrite memories, to implant suggestions, to reshape a person's very reality. The heists were a means to an end, to procure the necessary equipment, and I suspected with a sickening lurch, the subjects for his twisted transformations. The fog outside seemed to press in, a physical manifestation of the suffocating realization. This wasn't just a copycat. This was the architect, reborn or perhaps never gone. And his target wasn't the city's wealth, but its minds. And the most terrifying thought of all, he knew me. He knew my weaknesses, my past failures. He had used them against me then, and he would use them again. A faint, rhythmic beeping began to emanate from one of the monitors, a subtle shift in the ambient hum. It was a new pattern, more insistent. My flashlight beam swept across the screens, and my breath hitched. The patterns were no longer abstract. They were forming images, fleeting but recognizable. Faces. Faces of people I knew. Colleagues from the force, informants, even a few faces from my personal life, faces I hadn't seen in years. And then one face solidified, clear and sharp, staring out from the screen. My own. The journal lay open in my hands, the words blurring before my eyes. The architect. He wasn't just recreating his past crimes. He was escalating them, and I was about to become his ultimate masterpiece. The weight of it all, the sheer, terrifying scope of his ambition, threatened to crush me. But beneath the despair, a spark of defiance ignited. He had underestimated me once. He wouldn't get the chance again. The salt-laced air clung to me, thick and cloying, as I stood on the damp concrete of the container terminal, fog rolling in. Each breath was a struggle, a taste of brine and something acrid, like spilled diesel. The colossal metal boxes, stacked like forgotten gods, loomed in the encroaching gray, their painted labels blurring into indecipherable hieroglyphs. This was where the echo had led me, a phantom whisper in the static of my own unraveling thoughts. He knew me. The realization had settled like a shroud, heavy and chilling. The architect, the ghost I'd chased into oblivion, was not just back, but playing a game with rules I hadn't anticipated. The heists, so far, had been surgical strikes on the city's nervous system, not its veins. But the final piece of the puzzle, the one that gnawed at the edges of my sanity, was the chilling certainty that this wasn't about the city anymore. It was about me. My gaze swept across the labyrinthine rows of containers. A lone forklift, its engine a low growl against the muted roar of the distant harbor, navigated the narrow aisles, its yellow beacon a solitary, pathetic star in the gloom. I'd come here on a hunch, a desperate leap from a cliff edge of intuition. The last communication, a garbled message from a source I'd cultivated in the city's underbelly, had spoken of a package arriving, something of immense value meant for a special recipient. The details were scant, fragments of fear and desperation, but the timing, the location, it all screamed the architect. My hand instinctively went to the worn leather of my jacket. The weight of the pistol nestled beneath a familiar, unwelcome comfort. I'd hung up my badge, but the instincts, the primal urge to protect, to hunt, they never truly died. They festered. A flicker of movement, too deliberate for a dock worker, caught my eye. Near the edge of the pier where the steel behemoths kissed the churning, gray water, a figure stood silhouetted against the diffused light. They were too still, too composed for the chaos of this place. I began to move, my steps measured, trying to blend with the natural sounds of the terminal, the groan of metal, the distant clang of chains. The fog was my ally, a shroud that could conceal as easily as it could blind. I circled, using the towering containers as cover, my senses on high alert. The figure hadn't moved. Whoever they were waiting. As I drew closer, the details sharpened. Their posture was relaxed, almost languid, a stark contrast to the tension that coiled in my gut. Then the fog shifted, parting like a curtain, and I saw it. In their hands, they held a small, framed photograph. My breath hitched. It was a picture of my daughter, not a recent one. A snapshot from years ago, her gap-toothed grin frozen in time, her eyes bright with a youthful innocence I'd failed to shield. The world narrowed, the vast container terminal shrinking to the space between my eyes and that impossibly cruel display. This wasn't a game of chess anymore. This was a declaration of war. The figure turned their head as if sensing my presence. Even through the swirling mist, I could feel their gaze, a tangible weight. They didn't speak, but a slow, deliberate smile spread across their face, a predator's baring of teeth. They raised the photograph higher, as if to ensure I saw it clearly. Rage, hot and blinding, threatened to consume me. The architect's brilliance lay not just in his planning, but in his understanding of the human psyche, of the levers that could be pulled to break a man. He had found my most vulnerable point, the one I'd sworn to protect above all else. He hadn't just found my weakness, he'd weaponized it. The forklift operator, who had been a mere background detail moments before, suddenly stopped. I knew with a certainty that froze me to the bone that this was not a random act. This was a message, a promise. He was telling me he could reach anyone, anything that mattered to me. He was telling me that my past failures had not only cost me my career, but had also left a trail of vulnerability for him to exploit. My mind raced, trying to find a logical path through the emotional wreckage. The photograph, why that particular image? Was it a taunt, a reminder of what I'd lost, or a prelude to what he intended to take? The stakes had been raised not just for the city, but for my very soul. The architect wasn't just a killer of minds, he was a breaker of hearts, and I was his next target. The fog seemed to thicken, not just around me, but within me, a suffocating embrace of fear and fury. I had to act, now, before the gray swallowed everything. The colossal metal boxes, stacked like forgotten gods, loomed in the encroaching gray, their painted exteriors slick with moisture. This was the place. My gut, a coiled spring of dread and a sliver of something sharp, hope, maybe told me so. He liked the liminal spaces, the edges of the world where rules frayed. The docks, the forgotten industrial parks, the underbellies of the city. And this container terminal, fog rolling in, was the epitome of such a place. A transient zone, teeming with potential and pregnant with shadows. A perfect stage for his twisted theater. My fingers traced the cool, rough surface of a shipping container. The last heist, the one at the art gallery, had been a masterpiece of precision, too precise. It mirrored the signature of the ghost, the phantom I'd chased into oblivion years ago, the phantom that had shattered my career and my peace. Now he was back, or a copycat with an unnerving talent for imitation. I couldn't afford to be wrong again. The stakes were too high. I'd spent the last 48 hours piecing together the fragments, the breadcrumbs he'd so carelessly or deliberately left behind. The timings, the security blind spots, the subtle deviations from his old MO that screamed desperation, or perhaps a calculated evolution. He was getting bolder, sloppier, and that was my opening. "You sure about this, Cole?" The voice, a low rumble, came from behind me. The former security guard, a man with eyes that had seen too much and a weariness that settled deep in his bones, emerged from the swirling mist. He'd been my reluctant informant, a man with his own reasons for wanting this game to end. I didn't turn. He's playing with me and I'm about to play back. My voice was flat, a practiced calm that belied the thrumming beneath my skin. He moved closer, the crunch of his boots on gravel a stark contrast to the muffled sounds of the port. He's smart, cunning, you're walking into his territory. That's the point, I said, finally turning to face him. The fog seemed to swallow the details of his face, leaving only the glint of his eyes. He thinks he's still in control. He thinks I'm still the same broken man he left behind. But I've learned a few things since then. I'd learned to observe, to wait, to anticipate the move before it was made. I'd learned to live with the ghosts, and in doing so, I'd found a different kind of strength. My plan was audacious, a gamble born from desperation. What if it's not him? The former security guard asked, his voice laced with a familiar doubt. I let out a slow breath, the fog misting around my words. Then it's a very good imitation, and either way I need to know. The ghost's methods were too specific, too personal to be mere coincidence. I pointed towards a cluster of containers near the water's edge. That's where I'll be. The decoy is in container 4B. The real prize, if he takes the bait, will be in 7G a few rows over. I'll be watching from the catwalk above 7F. He won't expect me to be there. And if he doesn't show, then we pack up and find another ghost to hunt. I offered a grim smile, but he'll show. He always does. He needs an audience, even if it's just me. He needs to prove he's still out there, still capable of making us dance. As the former security guard melted back into the fog, I climbed the rusted ladder, each rung groaning under my weight. The catwalk was narrow, a skeletal walkway suspended between the towering metal boxes. From this vantage point, the container terminal, fog rolling in, transformed into a monochrome landscape, a chessboard of sorts. My chessboard. I settled into the shadows, the cold metal pressing against my back. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant, mournful cry of a foghorn and the gentle lapping of water against the pilings. I checked the device in my hand, a silent alarm that would alert me the moment movement was detected near the decoy. Then I waited. The tension was a physical presence, a tight knot in my chest. Every rustle of fabric, every creak of metal sent a jolt through me. I was a hunter, yes, but also the bait. The trap was set, and now all I could do was pray the prey took the bait. And that when he did, I would be ready. The air in the container terminal, fog rolling in, tasted like salt and something metallic, a tang that always settled on my tongue when I was close to the edge. Each steel behemoth loomed, a silent, hulking beast in the swirling gray. The catwalk above was a precarious perch, a tightrope walker's nightmare. Below, the concrete, slick with unseen damp, promised a brutal fall. I moved with a hunter's quiet, my boots making no sound on the grated metal. My breath plumed, visible for a moment before being swallowed by the mist. He was here, I felt it, a prickling awareness that crawled up my spine like static. The meticulousness of the heists, the chilling echo of the ghost's signature, it all led me back to this place, to this suffocating stillness. The fog wasn't just a shroud, it was a stage, and the perpetrator was the director pulling strings from the shadows. I reached the end of the catwalk, the wind whipping at my coat. A single, unlit work lamp cast a weak, yellow halo around its base, the only break in the monochrome. Beneath it, a small, tarnished brass locket lay on the concrete. My heart gave a hard thud against my ribs. I'd seen that locket before in a faded photograph tucked away in a file I'd sworn to forget. It belonged to the first victim. This wasn't just about stolen goods anymore. This was a twisted replay, a macabre performance designed to taunt. I knelt, my gloved fingers tracing the cool metal. A tiny inscription, almost invisible, glinted under the faint light. Always watching. The ghost, a sound, a faint scrape like metal on concrete from the far end of the terminal. I straightened, my senses sharpening. The fog seemed to thicken, muffling all but the most immediate noises. I drew the heavy pistol from its holster, the familiar weight a grim comfort. Every instinct screamed caution, but the urge to confront, to finally put an end to this phantom chase, was a fire in my gut. I moved along the periphery, hugging the towering containers. Their sheer scale was disorienting, a labyrinth of steel. A sudden clang, closer this time, echoed off the metal walls. It was deliberate, a challenge. I rounded a stack of crates, my weapon held steady. And there, silhouetted against the pale glow of a distant port light, stood a figure. They were holding something, a crowbar, its tip glinting dully. "You're not the ghost," I stated, my voice low, rough. The accent was wrong, too refined. This person was flesh and blood, a tangible presence. The figure turned slowly. The fog swirled, obscuring their face, but I could sense their gaze, sharp and assessing. How did they know my name? How did they know about the ghost? My mind raced, sifting through fractured memories, discarded theories. The meticulous planning, the use of the ghost's methods. It wasn't a copycat. It was something far more intricate. "Who are you?" I demanded, my grip tightening on the pistol. A low chuckle devoid of humor drifted on the damp air. "I am the one who cleans up the mess, the one who tidies the loose ends, the one who ensures the narrative is complete." Narrative. The word tasted like ash. You're talking about murder. And you're talking about justice, aren't you? The kind you thought you delivered years ago, but you were wrong, Cole, terribly wrong. The figure took a step forward, the crowbar held loosely at their side. The fog seemed to part for them, feeling more of their form. A woman, her movements were fluid, unnervingly calm. "The ghost wasn't a singular entity," she said, her voice gaining a cutting edge. "He was a concept, a tool, and I was the one who wielded him." My mind reeled, the ghost, the serial killer I'd spent months hunting, the one who had vanished into thin air, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives. He wasn't a phantom, he was a puppet, and this woman, he was the puppeteer. "You killed those people," I accused, the words catching in my throat. "I removed those who disrupted the delicate order of things, and you, Cole, you were always a disruption." He raised the crowbar, not in aggression, but with a strange, almost theatrical flourish. The fog seemed to swirl around her, making her appear to flicker, an apparition in the gloom. "You failed to see the pattern," she continued, her voice echoing slightly. "You focused on the individual, on the gruesome details, but you missed the symphony, the grand design. My own design was simple, to end this, to make her pay. But the weight of her words, the sheer audacity of her confession made me hesitate for a fraction of a second. Was she telling the truth? Or was this another layer of deception? She lunged, not at me, but at a thick coil of rope lying near a shipping container. With practiced ease, she severed it with a sharp, metallic glint from a hidden blade. The rope, no longer holding a heavy metal hatch in place, snapped back, swinging wildly. I reacted instinctively, pushing myself away from the path of the swinging metal. The impact against the container sent a deafening clang through the terminal, the sound reverberating in the fog. She used the distraction, darting towards another stack of containers. This was it, the climax, the final act in this grim play. I moved, the pistol now a solid weight in my hand, its purpose clear. No more questions, no more doubts. The fog, once a shroud, was now a battlefield, and the only certainty was the storm brewing within me, a tempest of rage and regret, finally ready to break. The salty tang of the sea, sharp and metallic, clawed at my throat. Fog, thick as a shroud, had swallowed the container terminal, its tendrils snaking through the hulking metal boxes that loomed like sleeping giants. The air was heavy with the damp chill, a perfect mirror to the cold dread that had settled in my gut. Her confession, a venomous whisper in the encroaching gloom, had hung in the air, a question mark etched in the mist. She'd lunged for the rope, a desperate, wild movement, and I'd reacted, instinct overriding the flicker of doubt. My hand shot out, catching her wrist, the bone surprisingly delicate beneath my grip. She struggled, a frantic, caged bird, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The rope, a dark serpent coiled on the grimy concrete, lay just beyond her reach. "I think this changes anything." I grunted, my voice rough. "I think this makes I innocent." Her eyes, wide and feverish, met mine. In their depths I saw not just fear, but a desperate, twisted sort of triumph. "Innocent? No, Cole, never innocent, but I am free, free." How could she be free? He was cornered, the evidence a suffocating blanket, yet her gaze held a strange, unwavering conviction. It was the same conviction I'd seen in the eyes of the killer I'd hunted for so long, the one who had become a phantom etched into my very soul. Suddenly, a sound sliced through the fog, a low, guttural growl, not of human origin. My head snapped up. A guard dog, a hulking brute with teeth bared in a silent snarl, emerged from the swirling vapor. The stranger's voice, a low rumble, cut through the tension. "Cole, the detective. I should have known you'd find her here." My grip tightened on her arm. "Who are you?" He took a step forward, the dog straining at its leash, a low whine escaping its throat. "Just a man who appreciates a clean slate and a job well done." A job well done. The words echoed the phantom killer's twisted philosophy. My mind reeled. This wasn't just about her. It never had been. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The artistry of it all. The stranger's lips curved into a humorless smile. "Art requires a canvas, detective, and sometimes a willing subject." He gestured vaguely towards the woman struggling against my grasp. My mind raced, piecing together fragments, a mosaic of deceit snapping into place. The phantom killer, the one who had haunted my nightmares, wasn't just a ghost of my past. He was a present danger, a puppeteer pulling the strings of the woman I thought I was finally bringing to justice. The dog growled again, a low rumble of anticipation. The end of the game, the final act in a play I had been too blind to see. "I wanted to end it, Cole," the stranger murmured, his voice laced with a cruel amusement. "So did I, but not like this, not with loose ends." He released the dog's leash. The beast lunged, a blur of muscle and teeth. I shoved the woman away, the impact jarring my shoulder. The fog, my only ally, seemed to dissipate, revealing the brutal clarity of the moment. This was not a resolution. This was a reckoning, and I was standing squarely in its path. The weight of my past, the specter of the killer I'd failed to catch, was no longer a phantom. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was coming for me. The game wasn't over. It had just begun.